Helen Irlen is the founder of the Irlen Institute, and she's an internationally recognized educator, researcher, scholar, and expert in the area of visual perceptual processing problems. She has been in the field of education for over 40 years, and her background includes school psychologist, licensed child and family therapist, educational therapist, board certified professional counselor, and founder and director of the Adult Learning Disabilities Program and assistant professor of adult learning disabilities at Cornell University, Long Beach. Oh my goodness. And it goes on, and she is in a who and who of pretty much every list out there. Over 30 years ago, research directed by Helen Irlen under a federal research grant studied methods of helping children and adults with reading and learning disabilities. One important discovery was that a subgroup of individuals showed marked improvement in their reading ability when reading using colored acetate sheets. Over the next 5 years, Mrs. Irlen worked on refining her discovery and developing diagnostic, screening, and testing instruments, and a method for remediating this problem using colored filters. And she uses both the filters in the lenses of the eye lenses, and also filters that you can put over sheets of paper or over the computer. This breakthrough, called the Irlen method, has been the subject of two segments of 60 Minutes. She's been on Good Morning America, 60 Minutes Australia, where I understand they broke all attendance records or viewership records. She's been on BBC News specials, ABC Worldwide News, NBC News, and she's soon going to be on a couple of other programs like The Doctors. And there's numerous other TV shows, newspaper articles, magazine articles, and TV documentaries around the world. Her work has been reported in textbooks on learning disabilities in various countries, and there have been over 35 published research studies. Wow. On the Irlen method, including brain studies using fMRI, which means functional magnetic resonance imaging, SPECT scans, which is what Dr. Amen, who has been on this presentation, who has been on these webinars, does. And as a matter of fact, I understand that they have worked together. Dr. Amen and of course Helen Irlen have worked together on some projects. And there's another scan called the VER scan. I don't know what that is. She's the author of Reading by the Colors, and her newest book, just released, is called The Irlen Revolution, which is a guide to changing your perception and your life. How a simple method can change the lives of children and adults with LD, ADHD, TBI, traumatic brain injury, dyslexia, autism, headaches, medical conditions, and much more. As a matter of fact, I have that book right here. I tell you, it is fascinating reading. Great information as well. So, I'm going to hand it over to her. I see one of our guests is trying to get on. I'll have to call her in a minute. How we doing, Sherry? Okay. Hang on a minute. Hi, Judy. Are you trying to get on?
It's Margaret here.
Okay, hang on a minute.
For Judy, actually. Judy's not here. I don't want to do it in a webinar.
Hang on a minute. All right, she is the founder, and she's logged on. Okay, she is almost in. This is someone from Canada. Excuse me, folks. Someone from Canada is trying to log in, and we want to make sure everybody can log in and attend this presentation. She is the founder and executive director of the Irlen Institute, which has over 174 affiliate Irlen diagnosticians worldwide, and over 7,000 educators have been trained to become certified screeners in the Irlen method. Many school districts and adult education and literacy programs have included screening for Irlen syndrome as part of their regular test battery. I tell you, it is just an honor, a tremendous honor, just to have Helen work with us in helping to bring information to the world.
Hi everyone, thank you for waiting. David, thanks for the lovely introduction, and I'm sorry you had to stretch it out. Every time I go to type in, I do something wrong, so it takes me a long time. For those of you who are here, we're about to talk about Faces of a Struggling Reader, and I particularly chose the title Struggling Reader because I didn't want to talk about just those who are identified with a learning disability or a reading problem per se, because I want to expand this and talk about more than just that. This is an interesting topic, and it's a topic that you wouldn't realize it, but there is a lot of controversy around the topic. First of all, there is a lack of agreement in terms of definition, and there is a variety of struggling readers. And we want to think about those. They come in various sizes and shapes and even ages. So we want to not just focus in on the young reader, because there are struggling readers who are in elementary school, middle school, high school, and college. Research has shown, and it's kind of sad, that 2 out of 3 high school students are now reading below grade level. And we're talking now about the United States for those of you who are listening in and are not in the U.S. Present tests, and I want you, as I talk, to think about a number of issues. One, as I'm talking about the present tests that you're using or are being used to identify your child's problems, are they identifying all of those who have reading problems? Because what I want to do is talk about a variety of different types of reading problems, and are they all being picked up and identified by the present tests? Can all types of reading problems be addressed by instruction and remediation and practice and just doing it over and over again? Or do we need to look at different methods for different children? And finally, what may look like the same problem can actually have different causes. And this is the concept that just because you have a label doesn't mean that everyone who has that label are the same and need to have the same type of intervention. That's why we're going to be talking about taking each subset or subskill of reading and looking at the various possibilities, because if we identify one possibility is going to lead us one direction, identifying another possibility leads us in another direction. And I'm going to not get into this concept of best practices, although we will talk a little bit about it. In some ways, I think it's holding up reading, because it's gearing everyone in one direction and saying there is one size that fits all, and there's one right way for everybody who's struggling with reading. And that may not necessarily be true depending on what type of reading problem they have and what's the underlying cause. So, first of all, how do we define reading problems? There's really differences in feelings about this. Many school districts will not recognize a reading problem until it becomes a learning disability and the child is reading 2 grade levels below. When that's true, very rarely are we identifying children then before 3rd grade. And so a lot of struggling readers aren't picked up or identified under the discrepancy model. Do we have to say that a child has a learning disability to say that this child is struggling in reading? And also, what about the term dyslexia? There's a number of issues in terms of looking at the term dyslexia. First of all, it can have many different definitions for different people. For the layperson or the parent, they usually are saying, when they're using the term dyslexia, they're saying, hey, my child has struggled with reading, and every intervention and every remediation and everything we have tried hasn't made a difference. And therefore, that's how they're using the term, and implicit in that is the fact that they're going to continue to have problems for the rest of their lives. The dyslexia associations, both in the U.S. and worldwide, have redefined the term dyslexia to mean a language-based problem. And so when they define and identify someone with having dyslexia, they're promoting phonics and linguistic approach to the problem. And then we have the school systems, and in the U.S., most school psychologists and most school systems do not recognize dyslexia. They will say it has to be a specific learning disability, but 2 states do. One is Texas, where they do recognize dyslexia. But for the school psychologists, they're talking about now a disconnect between the eye and the brain. Very different problems, very different issues, very different definitions. And I'm not sure that any of them are really important or critical. Again, in terms of labeling, it's looking at the symptoms and identifying what's happening and what is going on. Okay? So, and as I always say, we're not all the same. We all have different brains, and everybody's brain is different. So we can't depend on a diagnosis to tell us what the underlying cause is, and we can't assume everyone who has the diagnosis is the same and should be treated in the same way. And the diagnosis is not, or the label is not identifying the type of teaching method or approach that needs to be used to help the child. Those of you who have been around, like I have, the last 30, 40 years in education are pretty much aware of the reading wars, that we have gone from feeling it's appropriate to teach reading based on whole language to open court to now phonics. And somehow or other it becomes there's one and only one right way that we should be teaching all the children how to read. And I kind of sit back and I wonder what's happened to a number of things. One is, what happened to learning styles? We know that certain children learn in certain ways, and that there are different ways to approach children. What happened to the concept of multisensory approach for learning? Why are we so bent on terms of saying we have to find by research, evidence, practices what's the best practice, and that's what needs to be used in the classroom with all students? One of the things that I'm seeing happening now is the fact that we are stressing one method for teaching reading to the exclusion of all others. In California, I'm seeing certain school districts where the book publishers are actually dictating to the teachers how to teach, where they have one lead teacher who's trained by the book publishers, and they go back and in that grade level they supervise and train their teachers on that grade level so that every teacher is teaching the same material from the same book on the same day at the same time, and they're all on the same page. They are ignoring individual differences, and many of the teachers are complaining about the fact that they're ignoring the teacher's area of expertise, their ability to know how to teach and what's best for each child. So I just wanted to bring out some of the background and problems. I'm not going to offer a solution to the reading wars, nor am I here to suggest that one method is better than another, other than to say you better look at your method as it applies to the child. What I want to talk about, though, is let's break down reading into its various and different sub-skills and analyze each sub-skill as we go along. Reading tests are identifying certain aspects of reading. We start out with what's called your basic reading skills, okay? And then we have encoding and decoding, and then we move on to comprehension, sight vocabulary, and then comprehension. And I'm going to move this for a bit. Hold on a second. Okay. Hold on. I have to move and I can't get to the slide that's going to get me there. And I just lost it, and you'll have to bear with me. Even though I practice and practice this, I apologize for what just happened. And we'll get back to where we should be in just 1 minute. Okay, and now I have the bar and I can see what's going on. Okay, so let's start at the beginning, and let's start talking about basic reading skills. Your basic reading skills start with knowing the letters and identifying and be able to discriminate and know this is a B and this is a small b and this is a capital B, and B's are different than D's. And then the next level is to be able to associate the sound with the letter. So you have letter sound association. There are issues that create problems even learning at this basic level. First of all, learning your letters should be very easy, but for some children it isn't easy. There are children who have real difficulty with learning their basic skills because of difficulty with non-meaningful memory, and they're having difficulty learning the letters, their letter sounds, and even learning and remembering sight vocabulary. Equally, they have difficulty with their basic skills in terms of math and knowing and understanding numbers. These are children who can be very good at knowing and remembering experiences. You can take them to Disneyland and they can come back home and talk to you about it and tell you everything that they did and everything that happened. But then it comes down to letters, and that has no meaning for them. It's like, why is that a B? And who said that should be a B? And why can't it be a D? And they just don't retain this. Some of you as adults know that you do much better when you read for comprehension, when you're reading information that's meaningful to you. You understand it, you integrate it, versus reading something that it's not even that you don't have any interest in. It just doesn't apply to you, and it just doesn't stick. That's what happens for some children. And what we need to do for those individuals is we need to make it meaningful. You know, and you'll see some teachers who use colors, they'll use pictures, they'll use different ways of making the letters stick, different ways of what we used to call mnemonic devices. Then you have those students who can never grasp all of the letter sound association. Some of these students or children have difficulty with auditory processing. So you can sit there forever and go, eh, and they'll come back to you and go, because it's not that they don't remember it, they actually are hearing it the same, and they're not hearing subtle differences. These same students are going to have a lot of difficulty with phonics and also with spelling because of difficulty hearing the sounds and the differences in sounds and hearing it accurately. Interestingly enough, one of my main areas is looking at the fact that distorted perception, which we call Irlen syndrome, can also affect the ability to tell the difference between letters and learn your letters. And so we need to look at how distorted perception may affect some individuals as well, or some children. Typically, if you look at some of the combinations I put on the slide, MNs, U's, and W's can change and distort, so they can flip, parts of them can disappear, and they can actually look alike. So a child who's having difficulty that we think discriminating or learning the differences and remembering what the letters are may actually be seeing them in exactly the same way. H's and I's and L's and capitals and small I's and L's all may look alike as part of those letters disappear, and so it's hard to tell whether this is an H or an I, because all I see when I look at an H sometimes is just a straight line. It's also hard to learn and remember your letters if they look different and are changing every time you look at them. The same type of distorted perception can happen with math, so that 7s and 9s and other numbers are mixed up and hard to identify. We go from learning your letter sounds. We want to learn how to, next step is to sound out, break down words into syllables, and then to be able to blend them together, called encoding and decoding. Interestingly enough, there are children who never learn by phonics. These are kids, and you've seen them, they come to kindergarten and they know how to read. They just kind of absorb the concept of sight vocabulary, and they just can read. They almost can read at a third grade level the minute they start reading. I'm jealous of the natural speller who never has to study spelling, and they just know how to spell the words. You can't spell phonetically because with such a non-phonetically based language, the same way it becomes very difficult in terms of always sounding everything out. You're going to have to memorize certain things because there's as many deviations to the rules as there are rules. That makes it difficult for the child. But there are those individuals who start out and learn how to encode and decode. I'm going to come back because I want to really be here as I talk about it. To be able to encode and decode, you have to be able to see and break up a word into its syllables. To be able to sound it out, you have to be able to see the whole word. And this is a concept that people don't talk about, and that is the fact that different individuals, not just children, have different spans, meaning some individuals see one letter and only one letter at a time. That letter, as their eye shifts over, that letter goes out of focus and the next letter comes in. Eye shifts as a short pause, that letter goes out of focus and the next letter comes in. So they're actually seeing things letter by letter by letter. It's as if you took a word, or even you took a whole page, and you put each letter on a flash card and you flipped it flashcard by flashcard by flashcard. It makes reading difficult, but it also makes it impossible then to read phonetically and encode, decode, and blend together. So this is again my area of distorted perception. So we need to know what type of span a child has to even know if they're going to be able to break words into syllables and then blend them together, rather than being upset with the child who can't do it. But at some point, we want to go beyond sounding words out. We need to be able to develop a sight vocabulary, see the word, know the word, remember the word, and just read the word. You have different issues here in terms of problems with sight vocabulary. One is, again, for those students who have difficulty with non-meaningful memory, they may have real difficulty, again, remembering those words, and there's going to have to be a way to make those words meaningful so they catch on to the fact that they have to stop sounding things out and start reading words. I'm going to come into, again, the difficulty with distorted perception, which is processing of visual information, which is called Irlen syndrome after me. Here you're having the fact that they may read a word accurately one time on the page and then read it inaccurately or differently another time on the page. These may be children who, when they see a word in isolation, it's easier for them to read it than when they see it in context. And this is again because they're not seeing the words necessarily the same way as you and I. And the word may change and distort or look differently for them. So there are some children who never develop a sight vocabulary because of an overemphasis on phonics, and they're afraid to break away from phonics. They're afraid to look beyond the first letter, and if they don't recognize it and they can't sound it out, they don't look for cues, for small words within words that may trigger their sight vocabulary. For those who have Irlen syndrome and distorted perception, practice and repetition isn't going to help, because if the word looks different, sometimes it looks like saw, sometimes it looks like was, sometimes it looks like ASW. How do you know how to read it? And how do you then develop the necessary retention if it's inconsistent? You need to have visual consistency in order to develop a sight vocabulary. So, sometimes when I'm reading, the word read can look in any of these variations, and I'm just giving you an example of it to give you the sense that distorted perception can affect the acquisition and retention of sight vocabulary. Distorted perception affects math too, in terms of numbers and columns and being able to see signs accurately, because they may also change and shift around. So pluses can look like minuses, division signs can be minus signs. So not just reading but math can be affected by distorted perception. You would think that typically it's assumed that once we've gone through the beginning stages of learning to read and the different subskills, and we've gotten to a sight vocabulary, that comprehension becomes automatic, and it's just a matter of reading and doing more reading and continuing to read. Therefore, we have placed an emphasis on early intervention, looking at just the basic skills for those students who are kindergarten, first and second grade, up until third grade. And that's to the exclusion and not recognizing the type of reading difficulties that occur for the older student, or what we're going to call what's called in the research your later emerging reading problems. And we do the shift in third grade. Up until third grade, we have learned to read. We've learned the basic skills. In third grade and on, we now have to read for learning, and that is a huge shift, and that takes very different skills than your beginning reading skills. Early intervention is wonderful. My point is, it is not going to capture all of the individuals who have reading problems. You have other kinds of reading problems that may onset in third grade later on, or continue with an individual for a lifetime, even with the type of early intervention that we've been looking at. And these are your later emerging reading problems. And these are the individuals I want to talk about and spend the rest of the time dealing with, because I think this is the group that is the most neglected, and we're dealing with them the most ineffectively. The first type of later emerging reading problems are the ones that I call linguistically challenged. This is probably the most difficult type of reading problem. It's the one that when I see it and I've watched it and you work with it, you're not going to help by practice and repetition. Let me explain what happens to these individuals. First of all, there's a tendency for these individuals, you know how sometimes you have a word and it has various meanings to it, like deer. When you see deer, depending on the context, our minds automatically shift to, are we talking about dear I love you, or are we talking about look at that deer and that animal? We just do those automatic shifts, and there's a lot of words in the English language that have multiple meanings. For these individuals, that doesn't happen. They have one word and they attach one meaning to it, and that doesn't shift regardless of the context. And that happens and you put in the wrong meaning, you don't understand the sentence, sentence, and then that throws off understanding the whole concept of what that paragraph is about. In addition, they have difficulty with what I call your connective words, like therefore, because. These words don't have any concrete meaning to them. What's a therefore? What do I see when I see a because? It's not like throwing a ball when I can see the word throw. I can see the word ball. I can understand those concepts. For them, concrete concepts and concrete words are understandable, but when you're getting into these connective words that have no inherent meaning unless you're reading in a sentence, they just skip over them because they don't know what to do with them. And again, that changes the concept and the meaning. They also have difficulty understanding abstract concepts, abstract words, and inferences. They can't read between the lines. And a lot of times in terms of reading and reading for comprehension, that's exactly what we're asking an individual to do, is read the words, make inferences, and take this information and go from there. None of which they can do. But they can read. They can read all the words, and they probably can read on grade level. So sometimes it's hard to really even figure out what's going on for these type of students. Years ago, we used to have textbooks, which were perfect for these students. What it would do is it would take out the keywords for each section or each paragraph and print them in the left-hand margin. So you said, oh, okay, this paragraph is about elephants in North America. So you had something to grab onto, and then you can go ahead and read the text, but you knew what it was about and you had something to grab onto. That's what they need. So often what happens for these students, the parents find that even reading aloud to them, they still can't understand because of all the difficulties that are on the PowerPoint slide in front of you. So the parent instead reads the information, synthesizes it, and puts it into gets to the core concept and tells it to the child using a different language and a language that the child understands, okay? Sometimes they have to say it a number of ways because one way is not going to be understood by the child. Sometimes what the parent will do is they find that they can get across the concepts easier if they diagram them with just keywords or create pictorials around them. But words may not have the same meaning and they can't grasp the meaning. We have to then take textbooks and reinterpret them for these individuals to get meaning. We can't just give them books on tape. We can't just read to them. This is a very difficult group to work with, and I find this group is usually unidentified or very under-identified, but I want to bring it to your attention. I want to go on and talk about the students who say to me, and I've seen them now 30 years, who say, I don't have a reading problem. I can read. I know how to read, except for the fact that something's holding back their flow, their fluency, and their comprehension. But because they are reading on grade level in terms of sight vocabulary, people do not necessarily see them as having a problem or try to figure out how to address the problems that they're having. So, I love these students. I'm a good student and I can struggle. So I want to point out to you that good students can be struggling. So you have to look beyond two things. You have to look beyond what their sight vocabulary is, and you have to look beyond what grade level they're reading at, because they can have good skills. Many times those individuals who we work with are using strategies to get through the educational system without reading. And you can get through the K through high school system without reading. Let me talk to you, and I'm sure you're aware of some of these skills. And those of you who are teachers are also aware that you have students who are sitting in class and avoiding textbook reading. If they have good listening skills and good memory, they're learning by listening. And luckily, today, for these students, many times in classrooms in middle school and high school, teachers are discussing the material, and the amount of required reading in order to do well on tests is minimal. And so they're hearing the information and they don't have to read the information. Sometimes they're using what I call skip reading, meaning they read beginnings and endings so they can get in and get out as fast as they can, and they get pretty good at doing it, and they only read what they have to if it's important in between. They've learned how to look for keywords and just read that and answer the questions, but they never read all the material. They may use techniques such as getting their friends to read the material to them. I had a lot of different creative ways. I had a parent come to me, a mother who can read but can't read. How do I put it? And she was taking classes. She's married, and what she said to her husband is, you know what? I have to do the dishes, I have to do all this work, but I have homework to do. How about when I'm doing the dishes and I'm doing the work, if you read to me? Her husband never knew that she couldn't read with comprehension. I had another student who said, I just had my, I always took a class and made sure I took classes with my one friend who loved to read aloud. And so I just sit and listen and she read aloud. And I learned that way, and nobody knew that I wasn't reading. The problem with this is the fact that you can do that and make it through the K through high school system, but you can't get by in terms of advanced education unless you read. And a lot of these students who say, I'm a good student, get into college, and all of a sudden in the first month of being in college, they feel like they're a full semester behind because they can't keep up with the reading. And then they get depressed and they get anxious. And we see all kinds of emotional problems because they've hit a brick wall. The same compensatory strategies that they use to get by in the K through high school system can no longer work for them when they're in college. It's usually the girls who do that. Boys do something different. They just like being bad and getting identified as a behavior problem and dropping out. They don't want anyone to think they're stupid, and they don't want to waste time in doing compensatory strategies. Girls have great verbal skills and listening skills and can talk their way through the system. I actually had one student who said, yeah, I didn't do real well on tests because of it, but I always raised my hand in class, I talked a lot, and I baked a lot of cookies and gave them to my teacher. So we have creative ways of getting through the school system. Okay. In terms of this later emerging reading problem, it's reading for information and reading for a long period of time, because you're not reading a page, you're reading more than a page. You're reading chapters at a time, and you have to read for comprehension. That's the end product of reading. Okay? If you have a problem with reading for comprehension, and that problem is Irlen, or it even can be the linguistically challenged individual, often you can get misdiagnosed. You can misdiagnose as having a specific learning disability. We see a lot of individuals who are being misdiagnosed as having dyslexia and saying they have auditory processing deficits when they basically have such a distorted page they can't see the words. They have words that look like ants, they have words that swirl around, they have a page that's moving from side to side, and no amount of practice or remediation is going to make that page stable and clear, and so they get labeled as dyslexic. Many of the individuals, if you're not picking up on these problems, will get labeled as having a reading problem when actually we can change it and make a difference. Let me talk about attention, motivation, and distractibility. When an individual has Irlen syndrome and the print may not be clear and it may not be stable, there is a point, and let me kind of talk about it, and some of you out there may recognize what I'm talking about, where you can read and the print goes out of focus and you blink and you bring it back in focus, and you read some more and you blink again because it goes out of focus to bring it back in focus. But there gets to be a point where either the blinking is no longer working and you can't bring it back into focus, or it just gets so annoying, or your eyes are watering, or you're getting a headache, and you know that you need to stop and you need to take a break. And you also have become aware of the fact that when you stop and you take a break for a while and you go back, everything settles down and you can read again for a while. Sounds like, hey, that's a great compensatory strategy and a great approach. Problem with that is the fact that every time you take a break and you go back to reading, you can't start where you left off. You have to reread and then continuing reading. And you're already fatigued, so you can read for less time. You take another break and your breaks get longer. So each time you take a break, your breaks get longer and the amount of time you can read gets shorter. So it's going to take you 2 to 3 times longer to get through the same information as somebody who doesn't have to take breaks. The other issue is that when you take a break, and I ask adults, and I could ask those of you who are out there, how do you take your break when you get to that point where you just want to kind of stop and take a break? You'll say to me, I get up, I walk around, I get something to eat, I close my eyes, I rest, I put my head down. If you look at those same behaviors in the classroom, and the child is now doing that, they get up, they walk around, they look up from the page, they look out the window, they put their head down on the desk, somebody's going to say, wait a minute, I think that child has ADD or ADHD and they need to be tested and medicated. Sad thing is, if it isn't truly ADD or ADHD and it's Irlen syndrome, we're medicating children unnecessarily. And typically the medication doesn't work, and sometimes it makes things even worse, or the child's behavior gets worse, or they have a negative reaction to the medication. So we want to look at behaviors as a red flag. The child is trying to give you an indication that something's happening and something's wrong, and that you need to pay attention to it. Sometimes individuals with Irlen syndrome get identified as having eye tracking problems, where it seems like they have difficulty getting from line to line. They keep losing their place. They're told that their eyes are not tracking smoothly across the page. But if things are happening on the page, what happens is the eye goes to where the word is going. So if the word's moving, they're going to move their eyes to try to catch the word. If the word moves up, they'll move up. If it goes down, it goes down. As I'm talking to you now, I happen to have my Outlook on, and I keep getting this flashing every once in a while down at the bottom that says send, receive, send, receive. Things are supposed to be still and stable, and as soon as something starts to move, my eye quickly goes down there to see what's happening, what's going on down there. And a lot of times for individuals who have Irlen syndrome, that's exactly what's going on. Things are moving around where they're looking, and their eye keeps quickly looking to find out, what is it? What's happening? What's going on? It's very distracting, and then they lose their place, and it looks like they have eye tracking problems. In terms of behavioral difficulties, interesting how when you have difficulty and it's hard to do it, I guess let me kind of give you another quick concept. And that is, with Irlen, things may not start out bad, but the longer you read, the worse things get. So that it's like pedaling harder and working harder, but going backwards and not getting anywhere. And that's exactly how the child feels. I'm working hard, but I'm not making any progress, and nothing is happening. I'm not comprehending, but I'm trying, and I'm trying as hard as I can, and the harder I try, the worse it gets, and the worse it feels, and it's kicking in more and more physical symptoms, and the distortions are getting worse and worse. But you keep telling me, pay attention, try harder. And some of the children get really frustrated with this, and you're seeing crying and temper tantrums and behavioral outbursts. And again, it's an indicator you need to look. Don't just assume that they have behavior problems. That's what I'm saying about labels. It's not the label. You need to ask the questions to find out what's going on. So for those who are experiencing Irlen syndrome, I've added 2 other sub-skills that are not tested for with any of the reading tests or psychoeducational tests or neuropsych tests or that are presently being used. And that's inefficient reading and comfort. And the assumption here is that reading is comfortable for everybody. And later on we're going to go through some of these myths that apply to the majority of the population, but not for those who have Irlen. So you want to be able to identify those who can read and potentially have good sight vocabulary, but are what we call inefficient readers. So what are the key issues that you're going to look at? These are individuals who, at some point, not necessarily when they first start to read, but at some point they start to skip words and lines, lose their place, repeat lines, meaning they think they've moved on to the next line, but they're back rereading the same line. They misread words, see it correctly on one line and not on the next line. As they can read and continue to read, their reading gets slower. Their reading may be choppy. Their reading starts to deteriorate if they keep on reading. And they need to reread for comprehension. If you're dealing with individuals in 3rd grade and beyond where you're no longer hearing them read aloud, you may not pick up on the fact that they're inefficient readers. You may just assume that they're having difficulty with the material, and that may not be the correct assumption. The only way to know if this is happening, and I call this process information because the only one who has the information is the individual themselves, is to ask. Is to ask the child who's struggling and you don't know why and you can't understand. And reading and remediation and tutorials have not helped. Ask the question, at some point when you read, do you start to do skip words, skip lines, think you moved on to the next? Your reading seems to get slower and choppier, it deteriorates, and you find that for comprehension you have to reread for comprehension. Those are one aspect of the issues that you need to look at for those who have Irlen syndrome. The other issue is simply physical symptoms. Typically, we don't assume that reading should kick in physical symptoms. I know that I read for 6-7 hours because reading for me is like ice skating. It's like gliding across the ice. It's smooth, it's easy, and it never changes, and it always stays comfortable. When I ask even adults, what happens after a while when you read? Do any of you ever get tired or sleepy? And they go, oh yeah, of course. Isn't that what reading is supposed to do? It's supposed to make you tired and put you to sleep. I had one adult who said, who's a teacher, matter of fact, and she said, yeah, I get into bed every night and I take my book and I know that I'm only going to get through a paragraph, maybe a page. I fall asleep. My husband takes the book away from me, turns out the light, and everything's wonderful. She just assumed that's the way it's supposed to be. Individuals who get headaches from reading, when I ask them, do you think everyone gets a headache? They always say back to me, yeah. It's just if you read long enough, you're going to get a headache from reading. And then I have to have them look around and I say, well, how many of you in the audience do not get headaches from reading? And you see all these hands go up. And they're absolutely amazed that there are actually people who can read without getting a headache from reading. So we want to be able to ask these questions because the assumption, again, is the fact that we don't need to ask the questions because people don't experience strain and fatigue. People, children, even little ones. We want to ask how their eyes feel after they've been reading for a while. Do they hurt? Do they ache? Do they burn? Do they feel dry, sandy, scratchy, or itchy? Do their eyes get tired or heavy? Do they get a headache? Even feel dizzy, nauseous, or sleepy? Does it get more difficult the longer they read And is it harder to read in bright lights and fluorescent lights? And another way of asking that is, where is it more comfortable to read? At home or at school? And do you read in dim lighting? One key issue we hear all the time for individuals who are getting strain and fatigue is the fact they have a tendency to want to read in dim lighting. And the parents are always coming in and going, no, we got to turn on the lights. Reading in dim lighting will hurt your eyes. Again, sometimes children report these kinds of strain and fatigue and physical symptoms. If there is no medical reason or no visual reason for it, we just assume that the child is using this as an excuse to get out of doing reading or homework. And what happens is the child just stops reporting because people don't listen and nothing happens and nothing changes. Headaches don't go away, they're just not reporting them. I've never heard a child make up the fact that they have a headache or they're nauseous or they're dizzy when they have to read or do homework. If you're hearing that, it's an indicator, but you don't wait. You need to ask the questions because the child and even the adult doesn't know to report that this shouldn't happen. We take our own experiences and assume it's the same for everybody. And we're not saying to children in the classroom, we're not that reading should be comfortable and stay comfortable, and if it doesn't, to let us know. We're not asking these type of questions when we're doing reading tests to identify children who have reading problems. But does it interfere with one's comprehension? Yes. Does it interfere with one's willingness to learn? If it hurts to read, are we going to avoid reading and try to get by without reading? Yes. So we need to be able to pick up these type of late emerging reading difficulties. And I typically say late emerging, except for, this could happen, and you can see children even as young as in kindergarten or first grade who are already reporting that the page is way too bright and their eyes get watery and it makes their head hurt. So it's not happening just with or late emerging readers. It can happen to anyone and at any age, and we have to be aware of that, but we have to ask the questions and find out if it's happening. So if we're looking at that same group of sub-skills in terms of reading difficulties, we're also noting the fact that inefficient reading and discomfort can be related to distortions of print, background distortions, or even having a very limited span. And that when any of these things occur, it can affect reading at any level. It can affect the learning of basic reading skills, the flow and fluency, attention and concentration. It can affect sight vocabulary, the acquisition of sight vocabulary, and comprehension and reading to learn. What are some of the, if this is happening, okay, it's going to happen on typically paper, white paper being the very worst, but often your bright fluorescent colors will trigger the same kinds of symptoms. And I want to make you aware of that because as teachers, often you're sending home flyers on bright colored paper so that parents will quote-unquote pay attention, except for if they have Irlen syndrome, they're not going to even look at it because it hurts too much and they're not going to be able to read the information. High contrast black and white is bad, but fluorescent colors are equally as bad. It's hard to read on whiteboards. Interesting for me, we started out going way back when with blackboards with white chalk, and the reverse is very easy for those with Irlen syndrome to read. We went to green boards, and green boards isn't bad as long as you're not using yellow chalk. And now we've gone to whiteboards and overheads and projectors, and we're backlit in terms of your computer screens, and we're asking kids to fill in little bubble ends on white paper. Why? because for the majority of the population does not have Irlen syndrome, and none of these factors are triggers for them in terms of making reading any more difficult. Matter of fact, the majority of the population really likes high contrast. They like black print on a white background. They've created the ideal classroom and workplace situation for them. It just happens to be the worst possible for those who have Irlen syndrome, and we're saying you got to look and do it, not for quick periods of time, but for longer and longer periods of time as you go on in school. Other triggers is increasing the amount of print on the page and decreasing print size. And for those of you who are teachers and teaching in elementary school, you know what I've just described as third grade. In third grade, we increase the amount of print and decrease the print size, and all of a sudden, some of our students who are reading and doing well in terms of learning their basic skills start to fall apart. For other students who have Irlen syndrome, you're not going to see problems until we increase the demand to read longer, and then it's going to kick in physical symptoms. For other students, it's not until they have to read for comprehension that we're seeing the problem occur, and learning and reading for information. So, just quickly, for those who have Irlen syndrome, it's not practice, it's not remediation, it's not what method of instruction you're going to use. We need to stabilize the print, and we do it using colored overlays and Irlen spectral filters and environmental modifications, i.e. lighting. Fluorescent lighting for my population is the worst possible lighting. Many of the problems that we talk about in terms of reading occur just for these students sitting in class and trying to listen. That for some individuals under fluorescent lighting, they get the same type of physical symptoms. They get tired, they get headaches, and any of the physical symptoms that I've mentioned. And that makes listening, attending, and concentrating to what's being said very difficult, and paying attention. So we deal with what kinds of modifications, whether it's paper modifications and different colored paper for them, dealing with creating different lighting environments in the classroom. I've heard many teachers say that all I do is dim the lights down, and all of a sudden I have a calmer, quieter class. And I will show you how, by just dimming the lights down, you calm the brain down, and that is what's happening, and that's why you have such a calm, quiet class. It just feels so much better and so much calmer. So if you have a really high-strung class, let me suggest that you create either different lighting environments where you turn the bulbs so that in certain areas it's half lit, other areas near a window, all of the bulbs are turned so they're not on, and they're dealing with natural lighting, which is the best lighting, indirect natural lighting. And some areas are fully lit with fluorescent lights, because remember, lots of people are not bothered by fluorescent lighting. If you can, and you have a lot of windows, save energy. Go green. Think about, do I really need to turn the fluorescent lights on? And then watch your classroom calm down. What percent of the students are we missing and mislabeling because they have Irlen? 46% of those who have reading problems are dealing with distorted perception and discomfort. It may be the only layer, or it may be one piece of the puzzle. But at least if you take that layer away, what you're going to see is, regardless of the type of instruction you're going to be using, they are going to now be able to make progress and show you that they've learned. I hear a lot of teachers who are so concerned about the children they work so hard with, and they don't understand why they're not picking up and able to utilize what they're teaching them. If they have Irlen syndrome, they can't. It's like this block that doesn't allow them to. And all of a sudden we remove the block, and the teacher realizes, hey, I'm really a good teacher. And the child has been able to learn the information, and I have done a great job teaching it. They just couldn't utilize it again because of the distortions and discomfort. 46%, that's a large number. 36% are having the problem so severely that they are being misdiagnosed with dyslexia, sometimes LD, ADD, or ADHD. And again, it may be the only issue, or it may be a piece of the puzzle. But don't forget our good students who are getting good grades and look like they have grade level reading skills. 12 to 14% of the general population is working harder than they should, paying a price because they think strain and fatigue and discomfort should be part of the reading process, having to take 2 to 3 times longer to do it than anyone else, and not understanding why, not knowing why they have to read slower because they have a shorter span and they have to constantly stop and pull the next word and focus, stop and pull the next word and focus, so they can't read any faster. Why on time tests they're not doing as well as they should. We need to think about this population, identify them, and be able to address their issues for them as well. I thought it would be fun is to go through some of the myths about reading. Again, if 12 to 14% have Irlen, that means the vast majority of the population doesn't have Irlen syndrome. So that everything I'm talking about is true for the majority of the population, but is not true for everyone, and we think it always is. So everyone sees things the same way, right? Well, that's not true if you have Irlen. We don't see things the same way if you have Irlen. Everyone can see groups of words or even whole words as a group, and we talked about the fact that people have different span, and so that they're going to see different amounts of print on the page. My span is really large, so I can see like a whole paragraph at a time, sometimes even more than that. I chunk read because I can see the words behind the word I'm reading, the words behind it, the words in front of it, the words on top of it, and the words below it. So I actually read by concept. I'm not reading word by word by word. I read a lot faster than my colleague who has a span of 3 letters and has to constantly be stopping and never sees anything but those 3 letters and 3 letters and then piecing it together in order to read. Another myth is that for everyone, print stands out and is more dominant than the background. That's why we put black on white. It's supposed to be great contrast. For those who have Irlen, a lot of times it's the white background that stands out and competes for their attention. That's great, except for you don't want to read the background, you want to read the words. The words are what's supposed to dominate. Another myth is that the print always remains still and never moves. True for me. True for everyone who's like me, but not true for those who have Irlen syndrome. Another myth is print always is clear and will always stay clear. Nope, not for everyone. All problems seeing print are corrected with glasses. And I have to admit that even your vision care specialists a lot of times don't know about Irlen, so they just assume that if you have 20/20 vision, you don't need it, you have no problem seeing, and that if you need glasses, once they give you glasses, they've corrected all the possible problems seeing print. Not true. Black print on a white background is the best contrast for reading. Yeah, it's good for me, but not good for everybody. Letters and words are always seen as having spaces between them. Do you ever watch a child write and they have no spacing between their words? Many times writing is reflective of what they're actually seeing. And so they're actually showing you that this is what I see on the printed page. I don't see separations between letters and words. They all look the same and they all merge together, and I don't know where one word ends and the next word begins. Everyone can easily read for an hour. Hey, I can read for 6-7 hours. My favorite thing to do is fly over to Australia and bring books and just leave me alone. No one's going to interrupt me, no children, nothing to deal with, and I just will read and read and read and not stop reading. You really need to be able to read for 40 minutes to probably an hour to really be successful in terms of in school, in terms of the demands, in terms of high school and college. Otherwise, you're paying a price and you're working too hard. Another myth is reading doesn't give people a headache or makes you sleepy, and we've talked about that. And finally, good reading skills are all that are needed to read. Well, hopefully we've debunked that. Reading is comfortable all the time for everyone, and people who can't read aren't trying. I will say that I've never seen a child who isn't trying and doesn't want to read and doesn't want to please. Those who can't for a reason, and we as the experts haven't been able to identify that reason. And hopefully, today you've thought about other types of reading problems. What's happening in terms of why they're seeing things in distorted and discomfort for those who have Irlen syndrome is visual information is not read by the eye. It's read by the brain. We see what our brain wants to see, not what our eye sees. Think about an optical illusion. When you look at an optical illusion, what happens? Things happen, things change, colors happen, things seem to move. It's not your eye that's doing it. It's actually the V5 area of the brain that's interpreting motion. And this is where the information is being processed, and it's overloading. Optical illusions are overloading the visual system so that the brain is having difficulty processing it, and it's creating the distortions that you see when you look at an optical illusion. Well, when you put black print on a white background, the same thing happens for those individuals who have Irlen syndrome. So let me show you a brain. This is a SPECT scan, and these scans were done at the Amen Clinic. And Dr. David mentioned Daniel Amen. And if you haven't read any of his books, you need to read his books. They're excellent, as well as hopefully you will catch some of his presentations he's doing for public television. Again, you'll learn a lot. Change Your Brain, Change Your Life is one of the beginning books, and you just start from there and you'll get totally engrossed. His books are easy reads for the lay person, but they will explain to you a lot of what's happening, because your brain controls how you think and how you feel, how you perform. It controls everything you do, and you need your brain to be functioning correctly for you to be able to function correctly. What you're seeing here is you're seeing someone with Irlen syndrome who's reading on the computer. And if you look on your left, you see a brain that has a lot of white areas. And they're measuring blood flow to the brain, looking for areas that are overactive, and those are your white areas. And they're also looking for areas that are underactive, that don't quite show up on here. The area that you see at the bottom that's really white is, let's talk about it as being bright red in terms of it has such difficulty dealing with the visual information that it's not processing it correctly or accurately. In addition, when you look at this individual's brain, it's not just the back part of the brain or the visual cortex that may be having difficulty, but there are other parts of the brain. Look in the middle if you look at the first picture on your left, at the top left, right in the middle is your basal ganglia lymphatic system, and that's the anxiety and the irritability factors. The brain is connected by your spinal cord to the rest of your organs, so if it's stressed, depending on you and your brain, it's going to kick in different types of problems, and you may create stomach aches or nauseous or dizzy. The other thing you need to realize is that this is a brain that's stressed, that when you are overstressed, it's going to affect typically the immune system. And I don't care what's creating stress. We typically think of issues like divorce and jobs and children as stressors, but for individuals who have Irlen syndrome, reading and homework and fluorescent lighting are stressors. And they're creating chronic stress, and that affects the immune system. So what we're finding is that we're not just helping reading issues and issues with academic performance and attention and concentration. But when you have a brain, look at the right side. This is the same individual doing the same activity, reading on the computer. The only difference is this individual is wearing Irlen spectral filters, and this is a calm brain. This is a brain that's calm, able to process information and function, and that the immune system's not stressed, they're no longer tired and fatigued. So your health and your well-being, in addition to improving academic skills, becomes all part of the Irlen process. Here's another individual's brain. Here it's red hot. We're using red instead of white. And again, on the left is the individual without the Irlen filters reading on the computer, and the right is with their Irlen filters. I'm hoping that some of you who are out there who are teachers and educators will become interested enough in identifying those individuals who have Irlen syndrome so that you can help them pick out the correct colored overlay or overlays to use when they're reading and working, and will want to become Irlen screeners. Self-selection doesn't work. If you don't know what your problem is, how are you going to select the correct color or overlay? You know, it's not what you want to do. You don't want to just lay out a whole bunch of colors and say to the child, hey, pick one. Which one do you think is best? Because it's like, I don't know. And a lot of times they have a tendency to go for the color that gives them the biggest bang for the buck, but also, without realizing it, is creating the most physical symptoms. So I want to encourage those of you who I've tweaked your interest to think about becoming Irlen screeners. There's information on my website about how to go about this process. But be careful, because as bad as white is for individuals, there are colors that can be as bad or worse than white. So you have to really be careful. And it's different for every individual because every individual's brain is different. Resources. Main resources, get on my website, irlen.com. You'll see there's a wealth of information. In addition, when you get on the website, on all the pages, if you look up at the top right-hand corner, there's going to be a bar that has different colors, and you can click on the different colors and change the background color so you can try reading with different colors and see for yourself if it makes a difference, if any of them make it more comfortable, if it makes it easier to see the print. So you can, play with your different colors to get a sense, not what's best, but at least, hey, is this something that may help me? Or you can have your child try it and do it. If you're interested in getting tested, there's a list of test centers in the U.S. and around the world. I think I have 164 Irlen centers in 54 countries now, and there's many more. We have thousands, 7,000 screeners in the educational system who are now systematically looking at students in school as part of the screening and testing process and identifying those who need to use colored overlays. Colored overlays is considered an acceptable level 1 accommodation for standardized testing in many of the states in the U.S. Meaning as a level 1 accommodation, you do not need to have a 504 or an IEP in order to use it for standardized tests. Let me also I recommend, I wrote it, so I guess I would recommend it, but let you know that I've written 2 books, one called Reading by the Colors, which is the primer, and gives you a lot of information, and my newest book called The Irlen Revolution, a guide to changing your perception and your life. And what I'm doing in the second book is I take each area that perception can affect. Autism becomes a chapter and tells you how do you separate out those who are on the autistic spectrum where sensory overload that is perceptual in nature is creating a problem for them. We go into how do you identify and separate out those who truly have ADD, ADHD versus those where it looks like it, but it's actually Irlen syndrome. I talked about even psychological issues, because a lot of times, without realizing it, we have individuals who are dealing with anxiety, panic disorder, and depression, and it's really related to Irlen. And we talk about I take every one of these areas. So each chapter deals with Irlen and a different, how perception may affect this area. And I think, Dr. David, at this point I've left some time, and hopefully people have questions. And I think that's the most fun part of any webinar, is the questions, and the more questions you ask, the better and the more information you're going to get from me. And I'm sure you all came on board because you had specific questions and areas that you want to know more about. So feel free, and I'd be happy to answer your questions. Thanks, David. Yeah, people are looking at LED lighting and saying, is this going to make things better or worse? LED lighting right now, I don't know. I don't have a good read on it. I know that they're going to have to control the brightness on the LED lights. If right now they're still too bright. They don't have the same flicker effect. They do contain arsenic, so you have pluses and minuses in terms of your LED lighting. I have to say that if you ask anyone who has Irlen syndrome, what do they like? They like the incandescent light bulbs. I have a lot of my clients who are actually stockpiling light bulbs because in 2012 they're not going to be available anymore. So I wish I could answer that more specifically, but I don't have enough of a history to be able to tell you. I know they're working with the LED lights to try to make them the next, what do you say, the next wave of the future after fluorescent lights. Okay? All right. So I'll go back, and this is a long question. Doesn't this later emerging reading problems also come up when the density of the text increases? My daughter cut her left eye open, cornea collapsed, and she had surgery. She has 20/20 vision in her good eye and 20/60 vision in the eye due to scarring and astigmatism. She struggles with reading. Will the Irlen method help her? You are completely right. It has become my personal mission to spread the word about Irlen syndrome in my area and state. My daughter is an inefficient reader going into the 6th grade. Can you use the filtered glasses with prescription glasses? Oh, they're all different questions. Okay. Okay. First question is about yes, and I said it and I'll kind of repeat it. One kicker in for difficulty if you have Irlen syndrome is crowdedness. The more print on the page, the more difficult it becomes, because the more that the distortions become more evident. So density of the text really can create a problem. Second question is whether the child who had a cornea collapse and surgery and has scarring, is struggling with reading, whether the Irlen method will help her. My suggestion is this: get on to, and this is what's fun about it, is we get to say, go take the self-test. Go try things out, in the sense that you can get on to www.irlen.com, have your daughter take the self-test, have her look at the print when you change the background. It'll give you an indicator of whether this is a method that may help you. The other thing that we do is that Irlen testing is divided into 2 parts. The first part is called screening. And here we again work at identifying those who have Irlen syndrome. We then use colored overlays over the text, which should make an immediate difference if you have Irlen syndrome. And you get to take those overlays home with you to see if the difference holds up over time. So nobody goes on to Irlen spectral filters unless we know and you see a moderate to significant difference using colored overlays. The other question is, can you use Irlen filters with prescription glasses? Absolutely. Makes no difference whether you need glasses or do not need glasses. We can add the color to plain lenses or with a prescription. Or for those of you who don't like to wear color, we actually now tint contact lenses, and we tint just the center portion of it so it doesn't change the color of your eye. And there is a center in Austin, Texas. Get online, go into my test centers, and you'll be able to easily contact that individual. Okay. With the new trends in LED lighting, or the ability to color, tint test lighting of a room, could you provide a potential benefit? You got an issue. The other thing, you can do in terms of not only just with LEDs in terms of changing the lighting, you can go and get what is theatrical gels, and you can change the lighting by using theatrical gels. The problem with that is everybody's brain is different. So some people may need yellow light, other people blue light, other people green light, and that if you're using the wrong light, you're going to make it worse. So this really has to be done individually. You can't do it by changing the color and helping everybody. You're going to help some, but not other people. What is the percentage of students who may have both dyslexia and Irlen? About a third. It's interesting. It's about 1/3 who have Irlen and are being misdiagnosed. And boy, we just use colored overlays and colored glasses, and their problems go away. There's another third who have both Irlen and dyslexia, and so that you use the overlay, and they're going to still continue to have reading problems, but at least you stabilized the print, made it more comfortable, so they're going to be more likely to be able to work longer and harder at the remediation instruction that they need because they have dyslexia. And there's 1/3 who just have dyslexia and no perceptual processing problems. Okay. My son wants to know, what is the best way to remove scratches from an overlay? You can't remove scratches from an overlay. I'm sorry. They are kind of dispensable. Same way you shouldn't leave them out in sunlight. They'll melt. There is a point where you do have to replace them. That being said, I've had some adults who have come back to me and said, I was a child and I've been using my overlay and the same overlay for the last 5 years, and I can't believe that they've kept the overlay in good enough condition. Typically, you'd expect the overlays to scratch and wrinkle and have to be replaced. Next question. I often play classical music during the school day in my classroom. Does this affect a student with Irlen syndrome differently than others? Oh, what a wonderful idea. Can I come and be in your class? I think that's lovely. You know, the research that shows that playing classical music helps the brain function better. You know what? Ask your students how many, if there are any of them are bothered by hearing the classical music, and let them then use soft earplugs if it bothers them. Again, auditory background distortions, that's going to vary. It's not necessarily going to go along with Irlen syndrome. But I want to be a student in your class. Okay. Next, if you tinted incandescent lighting in a room to your preferred Irlen color, would this help? Interesting question. If you tinted your lights, yes, it would help. It wouldn't necessarily be the same as your Irlen preferred color, but if you know what your preferred color is, then you know the type of feeling and reaction and what you want to get. And yes, you can use incandescent lights, a different color. By the way, we do for very young children and children who do not have language, who are on the autistic spectrum, one of our screening methods is to use different colored light bulbs and have the child in a room where all of the other ambient light is blocked and they're only seeing the light through first a green bulb and the next day a yellow bulb and the next day a blue bulb. And if they have Irlen, you can actually see the difference in their behavior, in changes in what they can do with the different light bulbs, with some of them making it worse and some of them making it a little bit better, but one color making it significantly better than any of the others. If you don't have Irlen, changing the color of the light bulbs, if you're on the autistic spectrum, is not going to make a difference at all. Oh, I love the next question. How much will hormonal changes and medication changes affect the color needed for Irlen syndrome? Well, I think he just could have stated hormonal changes and medication changes the effect of color for those who have Irlen syndrome. So what happens here, if I can expand on this a little bit, is if you have Irlen syndrome, we always say as a child is growing and maturing, because their hormones will change, you have to pay attention because their colors are probably going to change as they grow and their hormones change. I never test a pregnant woman because her hormones are all over the place and I'm not going to get an accurate reading on what color they need, and it's going to change. Some medications can have an effect on color. So it's something that you need to pay attention to. I'm surprised there are no other questions. Oh, you know, it's a question that's asked all the time is, does Irlen syndrome change with age? And I'm usually asked the question, does it get worse as you get older? I think a couple of things happen. One is, as you get older, you have less energy, and your immune system, if you have Irlen, has become weaker, so it may seem like it gets worse as you get older. The other issue is a change in what you're doing may make a difference. So I have parents who, once they graduate from school, they're not working, they're raising children, and then all of a sudden at some point they go back into the job market and they are working now in offices under fluorescent lighting, and they are going, oh, I'm really having problems or difficulty. Now, you always have the problem, but it's now being triggered because of you're now having to work on computers, you're now under fluorescent lighting, you're now having to do more visually intensive activities. So those are some of the factors that can make it seem as if, or even make it so that Irlen does seem to get worse with age. And I gather I have a very educated audience out there, because most of you are aware of the fact that this is inherited and that you can pass it on. And it's wonderful from the point of view that whenever I identify a child who has Irlen syndrome, I'm able to say to them, guess what? This is not your fault. You get to blame either your mom or your dad or both because it's inherited. And the parent then gives me this look, and I go, but don't worry, you get to blame your mom or your dad. But what you see is a really quick self-concept change, because this child has blamed themselves and couldn't understand why, when they tried so hard, things didn't get better, they just got worse. And for the first time, I'm saying, no, it's not your fault. You couldn't have made the background behave. You couldn't have stopped the flashing. You couldn't have stopped the words from moving. This has nothing to do with motivation or trying or attention. Blame your mom or blame your dad, because you got it honestly. We're also now working with individuals who have acquired Irlen syndrome because of sometimes medication, certain autoimmune diseases make you more light sensitive, strokes, and head injuries, and TBIs, and whiplash. And these are triggering the same Irlen symptoms, and the method of using color and Irlen spectral filters is equally as effective. What is it about fluorescent lighting that makes it such a problem? there are two things about fluorescent lighting. One, if you look at the scan, it doesn't match natural lighting or daylight. It is a very different scan. Two, as the fluorescent lights age, the color changes, so you can be in a classroom and without realizing it, you have 5 different light banks and they're all projecting different colors. And three, the brightness or the amount of lighting has doubled since World War II, so we're overlit and we're way too bright under the myth that brighter is better. And finally, fluorescent lights have a flicker effect. And without realizing it, even though you can't see it, your brain is perceiving that flickering and it creates sensory overload for the brain. And then the question is, how much will hormone changes, medication changes affect the color need for those with Irlen syndrome? All I said is it may, I can't tell you how much, it can shift it. It can mean that you shift in terms of color and shift in terms of density. You can need more or less. This is like in, when you're baking, it's a pinch of this, and if you do a pinch wrong or you add something wrong to the mix, it changes the taste. For us, if we hit a color band that we're filtering and we shouldn't, or we miss a band, or we take one of the bands and each one individually, we have to look at what density, because too light or too dark is wrong, not filtering out a band we need to is wrong. It has to be that exact for us to be able to calm the brain down and get rid of all the symptoms. Can you please repeat what you said about dyslexia and Irlen syndrome in the same person? Okay. Actually, and then what's the percentages for ADHD? Actually, they're the same whether we're dealing, it seems, with dyslexia or ADHD. About a third of those who are presently being identified with dyslexia or ADHD are being totally misidentified and mislabeled, and the problem is actually Irlen syndrome. That's a third. There is another third who actually have dyslexia or have ADHD, but in addition have Irlen syndrome, so they have both. And what we see if it's affecting ADD, ADHD is when we address the fact that the attention and concentration and performance is affected by lighting and visually intensive activities, and be able to calm the brain down. A lot of times if they truly also have ADHD or ADD, then they'll still need medication, but a lot of times we can reduce the amount of medication that they're on, and obviously the less medication the better you are. And it's about a third who have dyslexia and nothing else is going on. Irlen is not part of the problem. And about a third who truly have only ADD, ADHD and aren't going to need colored overlays or Irlen spectral filters. So it's a third, a third, a third. I hope I'm clear on that. If not, kick it back in and I'll state it another way. I feel like the linguistically challenged. I wish I could just kind of draw it for you, make it easier. Next question. My college-age son asked me why I was using dark green paper for one of my students. When I explained that for this student, print rises off the paper, he replied, "Yes, it does. You just have to concentrate harder to get it back down." I love that response. Or you can use your finger and settle it down. Or you can put your hands up on either side to hold the print on the page. Okay, this can be a problem for even your successful reader. How do you catch them all? I wish we could catch them all. I wish that the schools were just asking those simple questions that I gave you in terms of inefficient reading and strain and fatigue. It's an easy way of catching it. And I'll give you just another way of asking the question. So listen carefully. You can ask the student and say, I want you to tell me what reading is like, not when you start, but when you get to that point that you want to stop reading. How do you feel? How do your eyes feel? How does your head feel? Reporting of any physical symptom is going to indicate Irlen. Next question you need to ask then is, at that point that you want to stop reading, how does the page look? And if they say and report anything happening, it's blurry, it's going out of focus or whatever, you know the student has Irlen. It's so easy to pick up if we just ask the right questions. And I'll say it again and again. How many school districts in the U.S. require screening for Irlen syndrome? Looks like this is the last one. Okay, thanks, David. I don't know if we say require screening. We've trained over 7,000 to 8,000 educators to use the Irlen method in classrooms, and that's all I can say. It really varies in terms of the support. It depends on your administrator. It depends on the superintendent. If they change, then all of a sudden we have a school district that was screening everyone before they went into RTIs and before they went into intervention to make sure that the intervention would work, because if they have Irlen, they can spend their life just doing intervention, who are no longer using it because all of a sudden they got a different administrator who decided that this wasn't important, and let's go back to the old ways of doing things. But we keep training new people, and we keep getting into new districts. So we probably trained about 7,000 to 8,000 educators. We probably have about 1 million children over time who have used overlays in classrooms to help them in terms of attention, concentration, performance, and their reading skills. So, David, let me just let everyone know that you can still send in questions by typing them in, and that I'll be checking to see if there are any other questions, and I will personally answer them and get back to you. And thank you all for spending all this time with me. It's been wonderful and very enjoyable. Come again.
Well, thank you so much, Helen. That again, you covered this very, very well. And actually, Pamela says, thank you so much for this seminar. Listening to this has made me realize that my daughter got this syndrome from me. I relate to most of this on a very mild basis. I will look into your colored glasses. This is such important and helpful information. Thank you. Exclamation mark, exclamation mark, exclamation mark. Okay. Yes, indeed. And as Helen says, she's going to be answering more questions in the forum. So please, and let others know as well. So you can type in your questions, and you can continue the discussion. There will be obviously Irlen recertification credits available. So you let us know, and we will just give Helen the names of those who actually attended and registered for this event. All right, and Helen will be continuing her series in the near future, so just stay tuned. If you have not signed up for updates from our website, be sure to do so, and you can do that simply by going to our homepage, buildingstrengthwebinars.com. I believe you can click on the banner above this video, my video, and then you can there's a subscription spot, top left, I believe. You can go in there and you can type in your information, and we'll be sure to keep in touch with you. All right, this has been good. I think the questions have all been taken care of, and we'll just have to call it a night or a morning or an evening, depending on the part of the world you're in. God bless. Have a good evening. Bye.